What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Well, today we're going to continue on with our Iron 883 mod series by taking a look at and installing these Burley Brand Slammer Plus shocks for the Iron 883. Hey, what's up, YouTube? Welcome back. Today we're going to continue on with our Iron 883 mod series by installing the Burley Brand Slammer Plus shocks for the Iron 883. And before we get going, once again, if you're new here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell, and leave any comments below if you have any questions. But before we get started on this install, let's talk a little bit about these Burley Brand Slammer Plus shocks. So we're going to lower the Iron 883 by a little bit, but in doing so, we wanted to make sure that our comfort level wasn't compromised too much. And generally, when you lower a bike, you usually shorten the travel of the suspension, which leads to a rougher ride. But Burley Brand has this Slammer Plus shock, which utilizes a flat spring wire to give us about a 2-inch travel, and coupling that with a progressive spring should give for a better ride while giving us that lower look. So let's take a look at what's inside this box and pull out the shocks, and then we'll get started. This shouldn't be a super hard install, and we will need to jack up the bike a little bit with this floor jack just to get that rear wheel off the ground a little bit. So let's take a look inside and pull the items out of the box. All right, here we go. Yep, there it is. Not much to it. You get the 2 shocks, you get a package of the shoulder sleeves and spacers, you get a spanner wrench, you get a nifty little package of lube, and a set of directions. So as you see here, we have the flat wire spring plus the progressive spring, and that will give us the 2 inches of travel that will make the ride a little nicer, hopefully nicer than stock, but also lowering the bike as well. All right, so this install shouldn't take too long, but let's get started by getting that jack under the bike and lifting that back wheel off the ground. All right, let's get going. All right, so before we get started here, we're gonna take a look at the existing ride height on the bike and just get a baseline of where we started. So in my unscientific way of doing this, just taking a ruler here and measuring, and I'm roughly getting 2 7/8 of clearance above the tire. So when we put on the new Slammer Plus shocks, we'll see what our new clearance is and see how much we lowered the bike by. All right, so let's get started and let's get that jacked up. All right, so we have the rear wheel just slightly elevated off the ground, just enough to freely rotate. All right, so before we get started here, you're gonna need a T50 socket, Torx wrench, and you're also gonna need a 3/4 wrench to get behind and grab onto this bolt here to hold it in place while you spin that Torx out. So I've also removed my swing arm bag temporarily, just so I can have better access to both sides of the shock. And I'm also going to be removing the belt guard from this side, which I need access to a bolt that's sitting behind over there. So when I take this shock off, the bolt is holding in this belt guard here. So we're gonna be taking that off as well. So we do need to reuse the existing hardware, so we don't want to get rid of these bolts. So we're just going to hold on to these around down here, and then we'll get the shocks ready and put them in. All right, so we have the old stock shocks removed, and we have the new Slammer Plus shocks ready to go. We have 4 shoulder sleeves and some spacers to consider putting in. We have to get the shoulder sleeves in before we put them on the bike. And then once we get the shocks mounted, we can then figure out if we need the spacers, and then we just torque them down the spec and we are good to go. All right, so we're gonna start installing the shock, and it looks like we're going to need a spacer between the shock and the strut. So I'm just gonna put that spacer in and get this started. All right, so one last thing before we mount this shock up. I'm going to be adding a new license plate bracket to mount this to the shock, because when we get rid of the stock fender and chop it, this license plate holder that's attached to the fender will go. Yeah, and this vertical one should look a little nicer than this folding one right here. So let's put that on real quick. That's pretty easy, just slips onto the bolt. All right, so the last thing we need to do is torque the bolts down to 35 foot-pounds of torque. So this bolt, that bolt, and the same on the other side, and then the shocks will be installed. So let's torque those down. Okay, so the shocks are installed. Pretty easy, not too difficult. We added the license plate vertical mount on the side of the shock right there. And I removed the belt guard, which I kind of like, but to each their own. Anyways, let's lower the bike down back to the ground. Let's see what the ride height is and do a measurement and compare it to what we started with. Okay, so we have the shocks installed. So let's do our little unscientific test and see how much has changed here. And it looks to be around 2.5 inches. Versus the 2 7/8 that we started with. So we're about almost a ½ inch difference from where we started. Overall, that's not bad. You know, just a little bit of lowering difference. But I think that will make a big difference once we get this fender chopped right about here. And once we got that chopped, it'll sit, I think it'll look pretty nice. So along with this license plate relocation, and we took off that belt guard. So I think overall, I think we're looking pretty good. So last thing would be just to take it out on a ride and just see what it feels like.
3 days later.
All right, so we're out here on the road now. We got the Burley Brand Slammer Plus shocks installed now. So it's been a couple days since I've installed these, and we're out here cruising around. And so my overall thoughts after a few days of riding, had a little break here because of Tropical Storm Ada that came in during the week after I installed the shocks and couldn't finish this video up right away. So now we're out here and I've had a couple of rides on this so far, and my overall thoughts are, you know, this is a nice little addition. I would feel a little stiffer than stock. They definitely lower the bike. The height while I'm sitting on it, the clearance is about 2 inches over the tire while I'm sitting on it, and I'm about 200 pounds. Depending on your weight, you know, if you're a little heavier, they might sit a little lower, under 2 inches. Yeah, so I've been cruising around different roads and different scenarios, and you know, while it's not the smoothest ride, the ride still feels pretty good, and I'm still getting that little bit of a lowered look on the bike. So while it's not a huge drop, you know, we overall, I think without me on it, it's about ½ inch from where the stock shock sat. 2 inches of clearance, you know, lowers the bike a decent amount, gives it kind of a cool look. Yeah, so while you know, these shocks might not lower the bike super low, you know, you still have to have some room for the suspension to travel. You know, there is a limit to what you can drop a bike with a suspension before the fender will start bottoming out and hitting the tire if you start going over some big bumps. So, you know, I guess it's a balance between getting low but also having enough room to travel and keeping the springs stiff enough so you're not constantly just bouncing up and down, you know, rubbing into the tire. So overall, I think this is a good product. You know, if turns that I don't like it after I get some more seat time on these, you know, you can always switch them out later. But I think for now, they'll work out just fine. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that install and somewhat of a review of the Burley Brand Slammer Plus shocks. And I appreciate you all for sticking around. And if you can hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and leave a comment below if you have the Slammer Plus shocks, or if you have something different. You know, maybe there's something I missed and didn't see while I was doing my research. But let me know what you think about the lowered look on the Sportster. And you know, hopefully stick around. I'm going to start working on the rear fender next. Thanks again for watching. And you know, I'll see you on the next one, YouTube. And as always, keep riding and stay safe. All right, YouTube. See ya. Peace.